I'm going to ask you a very, seems a stupid question, but it's quite a logical one when we go into a bit more detail. Is Legacy Auto the best people for making EVs? Okay, so I'm Dave. Welcome to Dave Takes It On. We always look into a little bit more detail about what's going on. And there was an automatic assumption in the early days that the best people for making EVs, once they started to catch on, was Legacy Auto. They've got the factories, they've got the production lines, they've got the staff, they've got the network set up for dealers, servicing, everything else. They've got almost 100 years of experience, and therefore, of course, they're the best people to make EVs. Well, last few years has shown us that that's actually not true. They are struggling big time. You know, Ford producing 70,000 vehicles, EVs in a year. This is some 10 years after Tesla launched their mass-produced Model S, the one I drive. So it hasn't gone right for them. And there's a number of reasons for that, one of which is that they don't actually want them to work. For the simple fact is they have an established auto industry which relies on petrol or diesel, dying out in diesel, but petrol and diesel. And whether you put a fancy battery in for a hybrid doesn't matter, they're petrol cars, and they're very good at those. So they don't want anything to come in that will take away what they're already selling. That's it. That would be great. That'd be suicide, wouldn't it? Yeah, let's just come up with something better than what we're making. Everything we've got, every factory, every production line, every worker is now absolutely useless, redundant, scrap heap, and we have to start again. That is one of the reasons why the Legacy Auto is not the best for making EVs today. They have a vested interest in keeping what they make at the moment going for as long as possible. The second thing is a logical one. There's a difference in technology. Now, just going to go way back to when the Legacy Auto first started. This was early part of the 1900s, well over 120 years ago. And up until then, everyone had horses. That was the main thing, horses or ships, rivers or whatever, but horses if you're on land. And there were horses, there were horse and cart, there were stagecoaches, everything was done on horses. And then around about 1895, cars started making an appearance, virtually handmade. By about 1900, they were starting to get a bit more popular and better. And then Henry Ford came along and decided, actually, they're too dear. They'll never catch on at that price. We need to make them cheaper. So he invented the production line, etc., and the rest is history. But it's interesting to note that the old industry, the horse industry, that at the time was a massive employer. They employed horse breeders, stud farms. They had stables. They had livery. They had saddlers. They had farriers, horses' shoes. They had leather workers. There's a big clothing industry set up specifically for horses. Everything, a whole industry was set up for horses. And when the car came along, it wasn't the horse companies, the saddlers, the stables, the stud farms, who said, "Oh, I like these new cars, let's get rid of the old and let's..." It wasn't. It was a new entrepreneur who came along, Henry Ford, and said, we need to make this mass market. We need to mass produce these cars, get them down in price so they take over the horses. And a brand new industry started up, which was manufacturing in massive scale. So the car didn't start off by the horse industry thinking this is a better idea. And if we look back at mobile phones up until about 2000, 2002 were also all mobile phones. That's what they were. Apple came along 2005, 2006 and said, no, they're out of date now. You don't want a mobile phone anymore. What you want is a smartphone. No keypad, no nothing. It's all on a screen. There's a processor built in. There's a really good camera for the time built into it. You can go on the internet. You can walk around. You can do everything you want on your smartphone. Apple did not go to the giants at the time, the legacy mobile phone maker. They didn't go to BlackBerry or Motorola or Nokia. Instead, they decided, well, we need to set up our own factory. Very much like Henry Ford. So this seems to be a bit of a precedent. And in actual fact, the two industries, the legacy, the Motorola's, the Nokia's, the Blackberries, did persist alongside the smartphones for a good number of years. And then eventually the legacy just faded away, and Nokia and Motorola today, very different company in terms of mobile phones. I know they both still exist. But the new smartphones took over, then new industries started, people like Samsung, LG, all of the mobile phones that you see today. And they started up on the back of what Apple had done. So once again, when a new technology came along, smartphones, they didn't go to the legacy to say, you should make the new ones. Looking a little bit more recent, NASA, they're trying to get back to the moon. Now NASA, yeah, it's 50 years since NASA last put a man on the moon. 1969 was the first, Neil Armstrong. 1974, I think it was, Apollo 17 was the last, 50 years ago. And recently there's been a huge increase in the interest in getting back into space. There's a lot of money now in satellites. We all need satellites for things like the internet access, for data and everything. So massive industry. If you've got a mechanism for getting satellites into space cheaper than anyone else, you've got a guaranteed income coming in. So recently what's happened is that the government, American government, has decided we need to go back to the moon. The government has got a load of money, and it's given a load of money to NASA and said, go out and do it. You did it once, over 50 years ago, you can do it again. And unfortunately, I don't know if any of you are following this, but NASA's having real struggle trying to get it all working. There's two reasons for this. The first one, NASA has none of the engineers left from 50 years ago. If you were an engineer in 1969 putting a man on the moon, you would have been a graduate from university, so you would have been 25 as a minimum age, probably a lot more, a lot older, just with a bit of experience. So that person today would be in the 70s or 80s, long since retired, and if they hadn't retired, they've long since forgotten what it was they did 50 years ago. So the government's gone back to NASA. NASA's just gone back. It doesn't make its own things anymore. It goes out to contract. And it's just looked for companies that did what they did back then in 1969. And they now have just got a bigger, better rocket than it was back then. Basically the same. And they've got this massive, massive, massive rocket which they fill with huge amount, hundreds of tons of fuel, either oxygen, methane, hydrogen, whatever they're using. And there's 3 stages, and on top of the top stage is the capsule. So they fill this thing up with thousands of tons of fuel, shoot it up into space. The first stage falls back to Earth, crashes somewhere. The second stage takes over, takes it higher, then it falls back to Earth, burns up in the atmosphere most of the time. Then the final stage takes it up into orbit, then that stage drops back. And all that goes into orbit is a module and the capsule. I've sat inside one actually, one of the Apollo capsules. It would fit inside this studio quite comfortably. It's tiny inside. They were really cramped. So out of this, hundreds of feet in height and thousands of tons in weight, all that gets back to Earth is a capsule weighing a couple of tons, and 3 bods inside it, of course. And that's the same approach they're using today. It's just, well, we did it back then, it worked back then, let's do it now. In the meantime, technology's moved on, and we've got SpaceX. And SpaceX, they weren't actually a space company. Elon Musk, he bought one. He bought SpaceX and took it to where it is today. But he had a different vision. He said, it is stupid sending everything up, have it all burn up in the atmosphere on the way back or crash into the sea and sink, and all you get back is a little capsule. What we need is a reusable rocket, a bit like the space shuttle. But nothing existed at the time. And they were buying their rockets everyone was buying their rockets from Russia. That included NASA. And so he just sat up and he said, right, no, this is stupid. What we want is a reusable rocket. So the whole of the rocket needs to take the thing up to space, come back, land safely without damage. We need to fill it up again with fuel, put a capsule on top, or a starship on top, or a capsule on top, send it off again. And if you can do that, a space launch costs you a fraction of what everyone else was paying at the time. So, totally new approach, and now the most reliable, the most widely launched rocket in the whole of the world is SpaceX. Some of the rockets have done 20 or 30 voyages, still going strong. They're going up now regular as clockwork. There's, I think, what's the target? 47 launches this year. It's something absolutely stupid. It's becoming like a bus. But this was new thinking. Now, NASA, in the meantime, they found a load of problems because they've actually eventually, it's supposed to be launched in 2017. They've gone through billions and billions in government grants and just handouts. And eventually this year, in this month, in June, they managed to get it off the ground. They had so many false starts, so many problems, ready to launch. Oh no, send it back to the factory. It's made it up there, but unfortunately it looks like it might be stuck up there because going up there it developed a number of faults, some of which they knew before they sent it up there, but they're now not certain that if they send it back to Earth with 2 astronauts in it, it will make it. This is the mighty NASA. This is crazy. Anyway, the point is that what SpaceX did, they came in as an outsider. They had no experience like NASA did for 40, 50, 60 years, whatever it was. They just came in as a newcomer, sat down and said, what do we need? This is what we need, and we do it. And the way they launch, they develop their rockets is really simple. They sit down, the best minds in the world, they sit down, they make a rocket, and they go, right, let's fill it up and fire it off and see what happens. And several of them just exploded on the launch pad. A couple of them got into the air, crashed and burned, and then gradually, over time, they found they were coming back to Earth before they crashed. And then eventually they came back to Earth and had the first soft landing, where it landed upright. Amazing spectacle. And now it's all they do. They've now got the Godzilla arms, which will actually catch them in mid. It's crazy what they're doing. But the point is that NASA were not the best place to actually get a man back to the moon. They just relied on old technology, old methods, old everything, but they didn't have the old people who still knew all that. So they were starting from scratch, trying to reinvent what went out of fashion 40, 50 years ago. And the newcomer, SpaceX, has just taken over. They've done all the launches up to the International Space Station for years now. So coming back to Legacy Auto, are they the right people for making EVs? I don't believe they are. First of all, as we mentioned, they have a vested interest in what they do. They have the factories, they have the production lines, all the robots, the equipment, everything. They have the staff which are trained up in ICE cars. They have the dealers, they have the service engine, they have everything set up. And they are currently making money from that industry. Why would they want to invent something that just wipes that out? If they come up with the best EV that the world has ever seen, it means all of their factories are now redundant. All the factories, all the robots, all the equipment in it, all the production lines, all the staff, just absolutely redundant. So there's a certain amount of foot dragging they really don't want the EVs to take on because it would just wipe out everything they've done over the last 100 years. And that's why companies like Tesla are so successful. Again, they had no experience of mass producing cars, but they sat down, they said, what do our drivers want? They don't want this, this and this. They do want this, this and this. They redesigned it from scratch, and then they built the factory to make it from scratch. And then they went out and they found they couldn't buy most of what they want because it just wasn't available. So they started making it. This is Henry Ford. This is 100 years ago, exactly what Henry Ford did. Well, we need this. We need to be able to mass produce EVs. We need to get the price right down. And it's a thinking that the legacy won't allow themselves to do. So we're stuck today. We got Legacy Auto, one after the other, just launching. Here's a new car, new EV. This is going to knock Tesla off the top spot. No, it isn't, because you're not making what people want these days. So we have the question, is legacy the best for making EVs? I don't believe it is. I believe we need new companies, and you see this in China. The ones that have succeeded in China are either brand new companies which have started up on huge government grants to get the EVs working properly, or the likes of BYD, who have said, we're no longer making ICE cars, they're now out of date. We are switching entirely over to EVs, and sooner or later we'll stop making the hybrids altogether. And the reason they do it over there is just money. The government's paying them to do it, but it doesn't matter why, it's the approach. So in China, everyone's just going flat out on EVs, and they're now making really, really good cars. And they're making a profit, and they're now starting to dominate the world, a bit like the Japanese did back in the 60s and 70s. So I personally don't believe the legacy auto industry is the right one for making our new EVs. So let me know what you think in the comments down below. If you want to see more like this, please subscribe, click the bell notification icon, and we'll notify you every time we launch a new video. Thanks for watching. I'm Dave.